and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. I'm sorry we're 4 minutes late. We had some technical difficulties, but we're trying to work them out. This is Martin Willis, your host, and our guest this evening is Robert Powell, and we are talking Stephenville Lights. Stephenville, Texas, a great incident. Actually went by the Crawford Ranch, was actually the Western White House, George W. Bush's ranch. It's just one of these sightings. I've been wanting to get someone on for a long time, and I met Robert. Another person I met recently in Phoenix. So, again, I'm looking forward to tonight's show. Before that, we have Alejandro Rojas, and we had technical difficulties. His internet just went out. It must be the government or something. He can't even see the news, but we're going to say hi. He was away last week. People missed him. I got some emails about that. Quick housekeeping. All you listeners who support the show, I want to thank you all very much. If you can't support the show, don't worry. We still appreciate each and every one of you. And if you still want to listen to the entire show for free, you can always listen to us on Wednesday night at tonight, just like tonight, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here at podcastufo.com. I might be going live also on another station. I'm working on that. You can also jump in the chat room and interact with the guests while you're on listening live. We also run the full show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that is in a new time slot, which is Thursdays at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time or 7 to 9 Pacific Time, and that show ends just prior to Midnight in the Desert with Heather Wade. So let's welcome back Alejandro, and he's on the show because of the time change. We had, daylight savings time, which I'm really not much of a fan of, but Arizona doesn't change at all. And so now he's on the same time zone as Pacific. And I want to hear, Alejandro, I want to hear about your vacation, of course, in the open seas. But before that, I heard that Arizona has always had a constant battle about daylight savings time. And I think it goes all the way back to like World War I. And I actually have kind of envy, but does it kind of mess with your head that only Arizona and Hawaii do not change? I mean, do you have to like readjust to the whole country?
Well, I think it's okay. Having lived in Colorado, where we did have a zone change in here, it's easier for us. I mean, we don't have to change our clocks. We don't have to worry about, do I jump ahead? Do I fall back? I mean, it's just business as usual, and everybody else has to adjust to us. So it's actually pretty easy. Since I do interviews with people, most of my interviews are with people in other time zones. So it's still pretty easy for me. So it's not too difficult on our end. I feel actually it was harder when I was in a place where we had to change our time zone. I love this part of year, though, when we're aligned with Pacific, because even though I just feel more beachy, I feel closer to the beach.
At least, when you're driving that way, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to change your clock an hour.
We're in the same time zone as like San Diego, and usually this is the time of year where we start to make more trips over to California because we're beach lovers. But so I love that.
Well, speaking of beach loving or being near the water or on the water, how did your vacation go? You must have had a blast.
It was amazing. I did have a blast. I packed a lot of stuff in there, and if people follow me on my Facebook, they'll see some stuff. But And I already put out some vines, like if you follow me on Vine or something, of some of the stuff, but I'll have some more. I've got to go edit and put together some of my GoPro videos, but just gorgeous. Went to Belize and Roatan and Cozumel.
Wow.
And just some really gorgeous, beautiful places. And it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. It flies by. It goes by too quickly. And I wish I was still there.
I bet, yeah. Cozumel was one of the places I always wanted to dive. I used to be kind of an avid diver, went to the Cayman Islands, a bunch of places. But I've always heard it's beautiful there. I always wanted to go.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
With the GoPro, it doesn't get distances very good. So, I mean, there's a huge grouper and this huge parrotfish. And being there, they were amazing because these things are so big. But because they're a little too far away, if it's like 20 feet away, the GoPro has a hard time seeing it. So the stuff has to be up close. So,
are you talking about underwater? You was actually underwater with the GoPro?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know they did that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they come with a waterproof case. So you can do that sort of thing.
Wow. Parrotfish.
That's what's great about them.
Parrotfish, I've done some night diving, and parrotfish are really weird because they sit on the bottom of the ocean and they cover themselves with slime so no predators come after them. It's very strange to see them just sitting there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I think we're kind of off. We might be off the topic of UFOs. I'm not really sure. Could be.
Yeah, but I like this anyway. So, but Cozumel, the structures were huge, and so diving would be more fun to get closer to all of that stuff. But in the other places, we're right on top. We were really close, right on the coral reefs and everything. So everything was much closer. But gorgeous, gorgeous stuff.
I bet. Now, you hear a lot of times environmentalists talk about the coral reefs going away. Did you notice any of that or a lot of it?
Well, I've looked more into it lately about the bleaching, which it actually is. It turns white, but it's not actually being bleached. I guess what it is that the water gets too warm, and so the life forms that live on the skeleton of the coral go away. So that you're actually seeing the coral, which is the white. I didn't notice a whole lot of that. Some of that, we actually in Belize were on this small island that is a part of an old coral. Essentially is coral. I mean, the ground and the sand was all coral. That was incredible. But there was a lot of life and everything, which was great. One place, a concern of mine, and this place we went to Belize, we did some snorkeling, and I can't remember the name of the place, but I wouldn't recommend them. I mean, they were just so unorganized. They took large groups out, and these people were just walking all over the coral, and I'm sure some of it got destroyed there. Because
you can't do that.
These people just were not careful, and so that was really unfortunate.
A lot of things that sting there, too, when you're doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully nobody got hurt. I mean, there's something called fire coral, which can really hurt. And, of course, you touch the coral, and it can scratch you very easily. Yep. So, but luckily I didn't see any of that. I also did not see any USOs or UFOs, which is good because that's work,
That's right. You'd have to,
I just wanted to chill.
You'd have to take notes and stuff. That wouldn't be any fun.
Yeah, I know. Notes and crap. I'd be just like, do whatever, If some aliens came on board, I probably would have been just like, I'm off duty, dude. Come back
Call
later.
me back. Give them your business card. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, do you know? I know you're.
A couple of stories I remember, by the way, even though
I
don't have internet. Because now that I've come back, our IT guy must have changed something, and so I can't get online, and he's not here right now.
Just
if you
to
do
let
want to get to UFO stuff, eventually I can, but I can talk about the beach and the ocean for a couple hours.
No,
I
it's
know
okay.
Robert's listening; he can just hang out.
The one thing. Just to tell the listener, just before we were getting ready to go, Alejandro said, no internet. And then I said, okay, well, let's do it with the phone, which we're doing now. And then he texted me back, no internet, no stories. So I'm going to...
well, it's just harder. I'd have to do it by memory, which I do remember.
I have
stories. So.
I have your page up, so let's just go over a couple of them real quickly. I want to talk about the slow-moving UFO captured on video over Alabama. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, there was UFO caught slow moving over.
Perfect.
Why don't I lead, because I don't know the details.
Okay.
I don't have the internet of that case.
Yep.
But I do have some more details of like the BBC thing.
Okay.
I think this is exciting too. That the Nick Pope wrote a story for the BBC, and he's done this before for like the Washington Post and other things. So as time has gone by, some of these are editorials, but this was a piece he wrote about kind of the history of the UK's Ministry of Defence UFO study, and also about how he thinks that the Ministry of Defense should get back into the UFO investigation work. They closed their department in 2009. And what's exciting about this is that they listed his story in the editor's picks section and on the front page. So that's really cool. And essentially his argument here was that that now that nobody's, collecting civilian sightings, especially now with drones and the danger. I mean, the drone, like he says, could just run into an airplane. That really there should be a collection of that data. So for national security reasons, he makes that argument. But also that there's a huge interest that when they did post the UFO files in the UK, that was like the biggest hit for the UK government. It happens here in the U.S. too. So that because the public is so interested in the topic, that's another reason they should be looking into it. So great story, very interesting story, and it's so cool that the BBC has taken it so seriously and has really featured it.
That really is unusual. When I first saw the story, I thought, another British thing, but I wasn't even thinking of the BBC. So it's not a tabloid. So, that's great.
It's not a tabloid. And you're right. So many tabloids are covering stuff. But this is, serious, sober conversation about the topic. And I know you and Robert, who you have on the show, especially appreciate bringing the conversation to that level. That's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Robert Powell, who you'll have on in a little bit here.
Yeah, great. Well, you want to, I guess we talked for over 15 minutes. Somehow we did. So You'll be back next week, and you're actually going to have internet by then, I would think so. Yes, maybe?
Fingers crossed. That's the thing, is now this is the danger of doing the show live, is that definitely more prone to issues. But fingers crossed.
Right. All right, Alejandro, it's great to have you back. I know it's not good for you, but we love having you back, and we'll be talking to you next week. Have a good one.
Well, it is always good talking to you. You too. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Okay, a little bit about our guest tonight. Robert Powell, I should say, has a BS in chemistry and is a former collegiate debater. He has 28 years in engineering management in the semiconductor industry. He helped the company that he worked for, Advanced Micro Devices, develop its first flash memory technology that is used in today's flash cards for cameras, PCs, video cameras, and all the other products. His experience includes managing state-of-the-art chemistry, a chemistry laboratory, and managing a research and development group that worked on nanotechnology, some of my favorite stuff to look into, using atomic force microscopes, near-field optical microscopy, and other techniques. Robert is also a co-founder of 4 patents related to nanotechnology. And he has been the director of the research at MUFON since 2007 and also head of MUFON Science Review Board. He's an active field investigator in the state of Texas, having completed over 140 investigations, and is a MUFON STAR Team member. Robert is also a member of the Society for Scientific Exploration and the National Space Society. So we are talking here a man of science coming up to talk about Stephenville, and I'm excited about that. Now, we're going to play it's not a quick music break today. It's a little bit of a lengthy one. The music that I'm going to play today is people either love it or they don't. And it's a song that was given to us from award-winning country artist Moot Davis, who is also a fan of this show. He was listening to the show and decided to send this along to us. The song is called 25 Lights. And Moot wrote this song about seeing the Marfa lights in Marfa, Texas, which is only, I checked on the map, it's only 436 miles away from Stephenville. And that is considered just a stone throw when we're talking Texas, because it's a huge state. Every person in the entire world can fit in Texas with 100 square meters. That's how big Texas is. That's just to let you know. So hang in there. This little music break that we're having is 3 minutes and 49 seconds. And we'll be back with our great guest, Robert Powell, to talk about the Stephenville Lights.
And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. I'm sorry we're 4 minutes late. We had some technical difficulties, but we're trying to work them out. This is Martin Willis, your host, and our guest this evening is Robert Powell, and we are talking Stephenville Lights. Stephenville, Texas, a great incident. Actually it went by the Crawford Ranch, was actually the Western White House, George W. Bush's ranch. It's just one of these sightings. I've been wanting to get someone on for a long time, and I met Robert. Another person I met recently in Phoenix. So, again, I'm looking forward to tonight's show. Before that, we have Alejandro Rojas, and we had technical difficulties. His internet just went out. It must be the government or something. He can't even see the news, but we're going to say hi. He was away last week. People missed him. I got some emails about that. Quick housekeeping. All you listeners who support the show, I want to thank you all very much. If you can't support the show, don't worry. We still appreciate each and every one of you. And if you still want to listen to the entire show for free, you can always listen to us on Wednesday night at tonight, just like tonight, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here at podcastufo.com. I might be going live also on another station. I'm working on that. You can also jump in the chat room and interact with the guests while you're on listening live. We also run the full show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that is in a new time slot, which is Thursdays at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time or 7 to 9 Pacific Time, and that show ends just prior to Midnight in the Desert with Heather Wade. So let's welcome back Alejandro, and he's on the show because the time change. We had, daylight savings time, which I'm really not much of a fan of. But Arizona doesn't change at all. And so now he's on the same time zone as Pacific. And I want to hear, Alejandro, I want to hear about your vacation, of course, in the open seas. But before that, I heard that Arizona has always had a constant battle about daylight savings time. And I think it goes all the way back to like World War I. And I actually have kind of envy, but does it kind of mess with your head that only Arizona and Hawaii do not change? I mean, do you have to like readjust to the whole country?
Well, I think it's okay. Having lived in Colorado, where we did have a time zone change in here, it's easier for us. I mean, we don't have to change our clocks. We don't have to worry about, do I jump ahead? Do I fall back? I mean, it's just business as usual, and everybody else has to adjust to us. So,
yeah, I like Lindsey Buckingham a lot. I think he's underrated. Well, if you like that tune, you want to check out more, Moot Davis. You can go to his website. It's mootdavis.com. Anyway, we are ready to talk to our guest, Robert Powell. You can tell I'm feeling better. I'm not making all those hacking noises. Robert, how are you?
Hi, Martin. It's good to hear you again.
Yeah. So you're going to have to crawl up a little closer to your mic, I think. It sounds
okay.
A little bit quiet, and I'm going to do some adjusting here to see if I can fix it a little bit. And so, Robert, before we get into the Stephenville case, you are a man of science, and I'm always curious to find out why someone like you took a shine to the UFO topic. Can you give us your background and how you became interested?
Sure. Can you hear me okay now?
I'm going to have to ask them in the chat room because you sound pretty quiet. So anyway, just go ahead if you would.
Okay. I first became interested in UFOs when I was a teenager. I read Alan Hynek's book, The UFO Experience, and I found that very interesting. And then there was a case that happened in Australia back in 1978. And at that time, I had just gotten out of college, and it was a very interesting case about a young pilot who was flying from Australia to a small island, and then he disappeared, never to be heard from again. And they had, the radio broadcast of him talking about this object circling his plane, and then you hear this crunching of metal. And ever since then, I was interested in UFOs. I did not stay active, though, until I took early retirement back in 2006. And that's ever since then, I've had the time to devote to this hobby, which I really enjoy.
Well, that's good. It's good for everybody because I know you've done a lot of great work, and, we need to clone people like you. We need more people like you out there. And I sat through your presentation in Phoenix about the Puerto Rico UFO. I'm still undecided about that, and I heard you talking with Mark D'Antonio back and forth. That's still like an unexplained. I know we're not going to be talking much about that, but any developments on that since Phoenix?
No, nothing new since Phoenix on the Puerto Rico video. That one, in my mind, is the strangest video of a UFO that I've ever seen.
Yes, and if anyone wants to check that out, all you have to do is, I think it's on Open Minds. I know it is. I just don't know exactly where it is on there. You can also tell them what to Google. What would be the easiest thing to Google to catch that?
Yeah, they can Google on YouTube or Open Minds. If they just Google Puerto Rico Homeland Security UFO, and that will find it for them.
And it's a long video, and the thing looks like it's turning, and then it does weird things in the water. Someone likes your accent on the message board, and I know they're not alone. A lot of people love the Texas accent. Sounds like good people. I've always enjoyed being in Texas. I spent some time in the Austin area, also in a place called Round Top. I was there for a week of antiquing, and I love the people of Texas. Very friendly, and I thought that's a place I wouldn't mind living just because the people are so friendly.
Round Top is a big antiquing place.
Right.
And my brother and I actually own the largest antique shop in East Texas, east of Canton.
We're going to have to talk offline because that's my business. That's what my real life. I love doing the show. During the day, I'm an appraiser of fine arts and antiques. And I have been at that for several decades. So you and I are going to have to do some talking offline about the antiques business. All right, so let's talk about Stephenville. Let's go right into, first of all, what about the area of Stephenville and the people? Can you talk a little bit about that first?
Sure. Stephenville is a little different than most of the rest of Texas. It's about 70 miles southwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So most of your listeners probably know where the DFW area is. It's in north central Texas. So if you go 70 miles southwest, there's the town of Stephenville, which is in a county called Erath, E-R-A-T-H, and that's where most of this occurs. And Stephenville is really on a plateau. Most of Texas is low, around 600 feet above sea level. It's kind of plains. But Stephenville is on a plateau. Its population's about 25,000. It's the number one dairy producer in Texas. Texas is not known for its dairy cows, but Stephenville does have the most there. And probably the most interesting people in that city in terms of your listeners might be the singer Jewel. Mm-hmm. I believe she was married to Ty Murray, and they live in Stephenville. But the people of Stephenville are they're very typical small town Texans. They're right underneath the flight path coming out of Fort Worth, out of Carswell Airport, what used to be called Carswell Air Force Base. Now it's called the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base. It's much easier to say Carswell. So F-16s fly over Stephenville all the time. So the people of that community they're very used to seeing helicopters and jet aircraft.
Which we'll be talking about a little bit more as we go into the case. January 8th, 2008, is that when the things first started happening there?
That's when the bulk of everything started, was January 8th, 2008. And I consider the event at Stephenville, it's the most significant UFO event since the Phoenix Lights. There hasn't been another one really that's come along that compares to this one.
You know, now that I think about it, you may be right, because that's 2008. There were some mass sighting cases. I don't know if you'd consider this a mass sighting. Pretty much. We have radar data. We've been talking about that later. Lots of witnesses. It didn't start out. It started out there was something like 17 witnesses that grew to 100, and I can let you get into all that. But as far as big mass cases, there was Tinley Park. I can't remember the dates of that. Of course,
that was around 2001, I believe, somewhere around there.
Okay, and Phoenix,
and then there
of course, was
Chicago O'Hare.
Oh, that's right. Yep. That one. Let's just talk quickly about that one, because the Chicago O'Hare Gate C-17 or whatever it is. Yep. That object was just sitting above the tarmac, just sitting there, shot up through the clouds, poked a hole right through the clouds. Lots of people saw it, and the one thing that I've mentioned to Leslie Kane, who did some work on that, is that you would just think that, people in the airline business, whether they're bag people out on the tarmac or they're working somewhere in the airport that could have seen this, they don't always stay in the airline business. They go off and do other things. And I'm really surprised at this point that we haven't heard from anyone saying, okay, I was one of the witnesses that couldn't talk. I want to tell you what I saw. I haven't heard anyone come forward like that. Have you?
No, I haven't heard anyone like that, although I did interview and I did an investigation of a guy who was on an aircraft that was flying into O'Hare at the time all of this occurred. And he did not report this until 2 years previous to today. So it was roughly 2 years ago. And what made his case very believable was that this guy kept his tickets all these years.
Huh.
So he still had his airplane ticket, so I could verify, that plane did land at O'Hare during the exact time this event occurred. And he had a unique perspective to it that no one else had. He saw the object as the plane was above it. Once the plane became basically level with it, and then, as the plane landed, so he saw it from below. And his description was when he first saw it, it looked circular because he was looking from above. But when he was level with it, he said the object was definitely disc-shaped. But if you look at it if you look at a disc from below or from above, it's going to have a circular appearance.
Right. Well, that's amazing. So he contacted MUFON, obviously, and then you are in charge of, you're on the STAR team, and so you were involved in the investigation. Is that how that happened?
Yes.
The connection?
Kind of how it happened. Actually, this individual contacted Patrick Wynn, who's he has the Anomalous book site.
Mm-hmm.
He published the book we wrote, UFOs in Government. And so Patrick contacted me and told me about this guy. So then I contacted that individual and did a full investigation into his sighting report. And I put a copy of it into the MUFON database, and I sent a copy to Richard Haynes, who did the original work on the Chicago O'Hare case, so that he could add it to his files.
What really interesting. And so this guy waited for all this time and finally came forward. Do you know what changed his mind and what made him actually report this? I mean, he was not an employee. He was just on the plane.
I think I've seen this a lot in a lot of people. They don't report anything initially, and then they just, at some point in time, they feel like they need to get it off their chest, so they report it. If he had not kept his airline tickets of the day, when this happened, I would have been suspect, right, of his report.
Right.
But because he kept those tickets, and I was able to verify those tickets and the aircraft were there, and that his plane came in near C-17.
Amazing. So that's great. And, like I said, down the road, we may have more witnesses come forward. I'm sure it's going to happen sooner or later. And it's really like the gag order or whatever it is. It's really amazing that we just haven't heard from anyone. All right. So we got off track. We're going to get back to Stephenville. Can you talk about the incident? It all started with, I can't remember his name. They were out with a fire outside, right? A little like campfire, sitting around a campfire. Isn't that the first witnesses?
Well, actually, Martin, there was one witness who, his name was Ricky Sorrells, and it's worth bringing his case up because his case happened about a week and a half to 2 weeks before the January 8th, 2008 event.
Wow.
Right. And so what happened with Ricky is, and he's he's just an old country boy, and he's very down to earth. And if anyone wants to Google him, they can kind of read about him. But basically, he went out and he was deer hunting right before the sunset. And so he had his deer rifle with him. He was out hunting, and something made him look up, probably because I think it was probably getting dark as this thing moved over him. And this object was so large that it basically blocked out most of the sky. And so he looks up at this object, and Ricky's a welder, and his main comment was there were no seams anywhere in this object. It was like it was molded out of a single piece.
Boy, you hear that so many times.
Yeah, you do. And so the next day at work, he told his buddies about it, and they all laughed at him. And so he kind of put it aside, didn't think about it too much until January 8th rolled around, when everyone in town started seeing these objects. Not seeing them up close like what he saw, but they were seeing the bright lights. And as Ricky said, he felt vindicated because a week and a half earlier, when he saw this object, no one else, was willing to believe him. So So now we roll forward to January 8th. And the gentleman you mentioned, Steve, was the main witness. He was there with two of his friends and one of his friends' wife, and they were having a couple of beers. They were having a campfire when the sun had just set. It was still very bright outside when he sees these 4 extremely bright lights come out of the northeast, and the lights are moving towards the west, and he sees these extremely bright lights moving, and Steve happens to be a pilot, and so he estimates the speed at 3,000 miles per hour.
Amazing.
Now, in reality, there's no way he can really know how fast this is going, right? But so he sees these lights move, and they continue to move west until they get approximately where the city of Stephenville is in terms of, as the crow flies directly in that direction. Then the lights go from a horizontal to a vertical position. And instead of 4 lights, there's now 11 lights. So now these lights go into a vertical position. There's now 11 of them. And then all of a sudden, they just kind of like almost go into a large flame and then disappear.
Yeah,
so,
I remember the flame thing.
Yeah, so that was the first sighting. And so they went back into the house. And one of the 4 guys, it was Lance Jones, is a postal carrier. He left. He was kind of in shock, and he felt that, it's kind of crazy, right? But I guess in his mind, he felt like, well, this could be the end of the earth. So he's headed back home. And so he's driving back, and all of a sudden he sees the lights again. So he calls Steve and tells him and the other 2 people, which is Mike Odom and Mike Odom's wife, he tells them the lights are coming back. And so they think he's kidding, but they go outside, and then they see the lights coming back after them. Not after them, but coming back across the same area. Except this time, there are 2 jets traveling behind the lights, trying to catch up with the lights, but they never do. And so that happened at about 6:15 p.m. that night. So that was the very first report. Now, as reports go, if that was all we had ever heard, the Stephenville case would not be that. It would be an interesting case, but it wouldn't be one of these unusual cases that you get every 10 years or so. What made it unusual is what happened next. For the next 3 hours, reports came in all over that county from various individuals who were seeing these lights. So this was not an incident of several witnesses at one location. This was an incident of many, many witnesses at many, many different locations and across 3 hours of time. Now, that's really unusual, and that's what makes this such an interesting case.
Very much like the Phoenix Lights.
Right, exactly. Very much like the Phoenix Lights. And what drew my attention to the case, I was the director of research, so I usually monitor the reports that come into MUFON. And on average, MUFON gets about 20 reports a day all across the U.S. and actually across the entire world, but 80% of our reports come from the U.S. Well, the first thing that I noticed was all of a sudden we had 5, 6, 7 reports within 24 hours, all out of the same county. Now, that's unusual. And then after the next 24 hours, the number of reports went up to 20 reports and more. So that is something to this day I have not seen. And I've been in MUFON since the beginning of 2007. So that was a very unusual occurrence. So once we saw that, we knew something was happening, and several MUFON investigators, among myself, the state director, and field investigators all across Texas went to actually Dublin, Texas, which is 10 miles southwest of Stephenville. And we met at the Dublin Rotary Club with their building. We borrowed their building. And that's where we first interviewed the witnesses.
What was that like?
That was like a circus. The reason, and looking back, if we were to do this again, I would never interview witnesses in that type of situation because we had media. This really hit the media, and the media got very interested, which doesn't happen like this very often. And so we go into this building, and every news station's there. I mean, there must have been 7, 8, 9 different media outlets, and each outlet had 3 or 4 media people manning their cameras and everything. And in addition, we had probably 20 witnesses in that building. And trying to interview the witnesses, you couldn't even hear yourself think. So that was not a success in terms of interviewing witnesses. Now do
you think? Sorry to interrupt you. Do you think
Sure.
anyone got caught up in that and maybe over embellished, or did you get a chance at a later time to talk to these people one-on-one?
Yes, I talked to a lot of the key witnesses one-on-one, and I made trips. I live in Austin, and I'm about 2.25 hours south of Stephenville. So I probably have made 6, 7, or 8 trips up to Stephenville to talk to various witnesses. And I found that most of the witnesses, they weren't out there looking for UFOs. They were familiar with what F-16s look like because they fly over Stephenville 2 or 3 times a week. So that was nothing unusual to them. But these people their questions to me were like, we just want to know what it is. Is this something our military has? That was usually the most common question. Is this some new military aircraft that's been developed? Mm-hmm. And very few of them jumped to a conclusion that, these were aliens.
Now, the one thing about this statement you're just making right now, from what I understand, the witnesses all, or mostly, said this thing was absolutely huge, like 2 football fields or longer or something like that. Now,
well,
go ahead.
That's one thing that kind of gets changed by the media, right? As reports come out, there were witnesses who saw a huge object, right, like Ricky Sorrells, and there was 2 policemen. 3 policemen in Stephenville, which saw a huge object. But the rest of the witnesses basically just saw the lights. They didn't see the actual physical object.
Oh.
So that's kind of a difference between what the witnesses saw and what the media reports. The media does make it sound like every witness saw this huge, gigantic object.
Now, let me just ask you this. Were the lights only on one side of it?
The witnesses that saw the lights, like Steve Allen and his group, the one I talked about earlier, they're the ones who saw the 4 lights. Other witnesses just saw a single very bright light. And then another witness, the constable, actually saw, and I think he's the best witness of all. He initially saw 2 single lights, and then later those 2 single lights became, he estimated, between 9 and 11 individual lights.
Really something. We had an email message just came in. Someone wanted to ask you. And by the way, you can email questions. I can try to catch them as I'm going along here. can also jump in our chat room if you want to pose the guest a question. And we just found out tonight, because Alejandro had to call in, that our phone system worked. I hope it keeps working. So if you'd like to call in at any point and ask our guest a question or two, that number is 603-967-4030. Now, the question was sent in by Kerry. He sent in a number of interesting questions lately. And so the question to you is, do you think that there is a more sophisticated radar facility, such as NORAD, notifying localized military bases that UFOs are going to be entering their airspace, giving them kind of a warning, so to speak, just to have their jets ready to scramble or anything like that? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I could say that's possible. Of course, there's no way for me to know whether that's true or not, right? Because the military is not going to provide that type of information.
Good point. Yes.
So,
yeah.
And I'll go into that a little bit later.
When we talk about the radar data, that's really very, very, very important to this case. Now, what night was it that this thing started heading toward Crawford Ranch, George Bush's ranch?
That was the same night. That was January the 8th of 2008.
All right, can you kind of go over how that played out? You said for 3 hours people were seeing this. How far away is the ranch from Stephenville?
Okay, the ranch is really not close to Stephenville. The ranch is about 60 miles southeast of Stephenville. Mm-hmm. So it's in a totally different direction. And I actually found that object on radar by accident. Well, not by accident, but as part of the investigation. So I'm just going to jump back to when we had this big media frenzy, right?
Okay, sure.
Well, one of the good things that came out of that was I met Angela Joyner, who was the newspaper reporter who, broke this entire case open. Mm-hmm. And I met a guy by the name of Glenn Schultz, who was a former Army radar expert. And somehow Angela had found Glenn, and Glenn was out of Colorado. So he drove all the way to Stephenville from Colorado to be part of, this whole thing. And so I got to meet Glenn, and the important part of that is Glenn showed me how to do radar analysis. Now, I have a science background, but I was not a radar expert. But Glenn was a radar expert. And so once he explained to me the information that we got from the FAA, it became, pretty routine on how to analyze the radar data. And once we got this radar data, the very first thing we did is we checked out that we were capable of properly analyzing it. The way we did that is we followed the F-16s out of Carswell Air Force Base. So we picked up the F-16s on radar. So that way we knew where the F-16s were at every moment in time. And there were a total of 10 F-16s that came out of Carswell that night. So then once we had identified where the F-16s were, we then started to look for objects on radar that did not have what's called a transponder. In other words, there's no transponder code that's being beamed out. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's purely the radar beam hitting an object and bouncing back to the radar site. Mm. Well, Glenn and I had obtained 5 different radar sites from the FAA. We'd sent a Freedom of Information request. So we got that from the FAA.
Before we move on,
sure.
I've heard that that's impossible to do these days.
It is. Okay. They pretty well shut it down since those days.
Okay. And so right after you got this, or like a few years after?
Glenn and I made follow-up requests for radar data on other cases that came after this. And then that's when they started to basically shut down the release of radar data from the FAA. You can still get it, but it's not the same type. They don't. We were able to get radar data on individual radar sites. What they do now is, like where we had 5 radar sites, they would take all that data and just merge it into one big pile of data, and they no longer will tell us, okay, which radar site provided that information. They just, so they kind of scramble it, which is not, that makes it much more difficult to pick something up. So we got all this radar data. First thing we did was we identified the F-16s. Then I went to each of the witnesses that I had interviewed because I knew the time where they were at, their exact location. I knew where they were looking in the sky, and I knew where they were located. So then I looked at the radar data to see, okay, does radar pick up an object? And of all the witnesses, the most interesting one was the constable, who he and his son had seen the objects. This was about an hour after Steve Allen and his group had. And the constable was about 10 miles southwest of where Steve was, and where he was at home. And he goes outside and he sees these 2 lights. He estimates that the lights are about 2 miles away. That's his guess. He goes back into the house to get his wife to come out and look at these things. And his wife was watching, I guess, her favorite TV show, and she said, "No, I'm not coming out." But she had more important things to do.
Oh, yeah.
But his son came out. So he goes back out, and the 2 lights are gone. But instead, there are 11 lights just moving, as he described them, just dancing in the sky above his head.
Wow.
So the first 2 lights he saw were to his southwest. Then when he comes back out, now those are gone, and there's 9 to 11 lights dancing around. He goes to get his binoculars to get a better look. And as he's looking at them with his binoculars, these randomly moving lights, suddenly they don't come together as one light, but instead they all 11 begin to move together to the northeast. And the constable says he doesn't know the speed. He just says it's like, he was exaggerating, but he said it was like the speed of light. He says, basically they head to the northeast, and in a second they're just gone. So I got the radar data, and I said, okay, let's see what happened at the time the constable was there. So I look at the same time that the constable said he went outside, and he knew what time it was because his wife was watching her favorite show. And on the radar data, there's an object that's actually, I think he got lucky on guessing how far away it was, because there's an object on radar 2 miles southwest of his home. And this object is barely moving. It's like 25, 35 miles an hour. There's very little movement.
Which is impossible to stay afloat unless it's lighter than air, like helium or something.
Yeah, or a helicopter.
All right. Yeah, of course.
And so it's moving to the southeast, and all of a sudden, this object that I'm tracking on radar, on the next sweep of the radar, and the radar sweeps every 10 seconds, all of a sudden this object has moved to the northeast, the exact location, the exact distance and direction that the constable said it did. Well, based on the radar data, this object moved at 1,900 miles an hour, which for the constable, an object moving at that speed at low altitude is going to basically disappear within a second. I mean, it's there, then it's gone, because a car's moving a mile a minute, right, at 60 miles an hour, and this is 30 times that fast. So now you're talking about an object that's moving 1 to 2 miles a second. So it's going to disappear view very rapidly. And that's basically what he described. And that's what showed up on radar. So that was the most, I was like shocked when I saw that.
Now, just for the listener, what are you looking at when you're looking at radar data? Is it a screen? Is it paper? What is it exactly?
What you get from the FAA is paper. It's a digital file. And basically, you have a data that every 10 seconds is this radar sweeps. Anything it hits shows up on this data. So we had like 500,000 objects that showed up across these 5 radar sites all over Texas. So then what you have to do is you have to narrow everything out by time and location, right? So I know what the latitude, longitude coordinates are of every radar point. And so I know the latitude, longitude coordinates of where the constable lives. So I'm looking for any movement that shows up on radar within that area of where he lives, and I'm looking for how that object moves over time, right? So the first data point is, say, 7 hours, 15 minutes, and 10 seconds, right? So 7, 15, and 10 seconds. So I pick up an object, let's say, to the southwest of him. Well, in 10 more seconds, I pick up that same object to the southwest, except now it's moved. So, now it's just tracking that object's movement. So it took a lot of work. I would say Glenn and I put in hundreds of hours of work.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then the Crawford Ranch object, right? Once we finish, remember the sequence was we looked at the F-16s, then we looked at, okay, where were the witnesses and what did we see there? Then we just started looking for objects without transponders that were moving anywhere on that day. And that's when we picked up the object moving towards Crawford Ranch.
Yeah.
And, right. And what was interesting about that was we had 140 hits on that object. So it wasn't 2 or 3 or 4 radar hits. It was over 140. And in general, the object was moving at 40 miles an hour, but there would be times, and there was one time where the speed went from 40 miles an hour to 500 miles an hour in the course of 2 sweeps of the radar. So in 20 seconds, this object goes from 40 miles an hour to 500.
What is the G-force of something like that?
Oh, that would be huge. And that's a minimum, what I just gave you, because, right, I only know what it does every 10 seconds. It could have done that, right, since there was 2 sweeps of the radar, it could have done it 11 seconds in, not necessarily at 20, but I'm doing worst case. So I'm saying, okay, if it's at 20. At 20 seconds, I don't think a human would survive going from 20 to 40 miles an hour to over 500 miles an hour. And then the really crazy thing, and then it immediately slowed down on the very next sweep down to around 150, 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So that's just not something you would do.
Not with the technology that we know about that we have. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, none of this matches our technology, just like the object moving at 1,900 miles an hour. We can do that with jets, but not at low altitude. They've got to get up high where the air is thinner.
And what about noise? I mean, this thing didn't make any noise. That's what I heard when I was looking into this.
And anything moving at 1,900 miles an hour has got to make a sonic boom.
Oh, so it escaped the sonic boom.
Yeah.
There's theories about that. I've heard different theories about how that could be done. And so we're right at the top of the hour. What we're going to get into in the second hour is we're going to talk about Angelina Joyner's role in this whole thing. That's a name that I had heard a lot when I started looking into this a number of years ago. We're also going to talk about a football game that It was a mass sighting of in the area, and a whole bunch more. So come and support the show. You can listen to Hour 2. And that's it for Hour 1. Thanks so much for listening. Again, you can support the show for as little as $2 a month. It's right on our website, Podcast UFO. It's a one-time sign-up. You can do yearly subscriptions or once a month, again, for as little as $2 per month. Help us out a lot. Thank you. Next week, we have Jack Brewer on the UFO Trail blog. He will be joining us. And so, quick announcement. I'm going to be doing a fundraiser. It's actually to raise money for kids with cancer. I have a family connection, actually my brother, and when I was growing up. So I try to do stuff like this now and then. I'm going to shave my head. I can't believe I'm going to do it. So if you would like to sponsor me, I'm going to be talking more about that later. I'm not going to make a big deal of it. I'm just going to bring it up now and then, right until I do the event within 3 weeks or so. So anyway, that's it for the show tonight. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you here next week. Hope you enjoyed today's show.